Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Foundation for Science and Technology event. Thank you for coming along, both here in person and our participants online. This evening we are discussing how can space science missions advance science, drive innovation, and create a vibrant UK space industry. And we have three excellent speakers: Professor Carole Mundell from the European Space Agency, where she's Director of Science, Professor Amara, who is Chief Scientist at the UK Space Agency, and Dr. Tudor Chief Technology Officer at Filtronic. And we are very grateful to Filtronic for sponsoring this event. They are a significant space company in their own right, and it's great to have their voice heard. We're going to talk about space science. We're going to talk about how the UK can get even more value from participation in space science missions, and of course about the UK position in ESA. We seem to have, by strange chance, the chair of the UK Space Agency here as well. And I propose to ask him very tough questions indeed about what he's up to, and we'll see if he can blather his way through any kind of explanation of what he is doing. But we've also got three fantastic experts, and let's start with Professor Carole Mundell. She is the Director of Science at the European Space Agency, head of the European Space Astronomy Centre, an award-winning astrophysicist, the first woman president of the UK Science Council. It's very good of you to come and speak to us. Over to you, Carole.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I have 15 minutes to give you an entire tour of the universe, 23 member states, the entire 50 years, the history of the European Space Agency, where UK leads and where the UK can do even better. So let me start, and the reason I put this title here is that because I became the Director of Science 2 years ago at ESA. And for me, as a UK scientist and astrophysicist, I had a particular view of ESA. And even coming into ESA, I realized that many people didn't understand how the science program worked. And of course, when you think science, you think clever scientists sitting in offices having clever thoughts. And you think, well, what do you need all that money for? And it seems stupid to have to state this, but it's all about the technology, the engineering, the business growth, and particularly because our program is designed to cost. We don't just have open-ended costs. We don't go to our ministers and say, just give us the money that we would like to have. All of our missions in the science program are designed to cost. So we have to be ruthlessly efficient and continue to increase that efficiency. So everything is competitive from the scientific perspective, and everything is also competitive from the industry perspective. So when the UK puts their subscription into ESA, we deliver that return on investment. But to be able to do that and also deliver our missions, we obviously have to develop a competitive space sector. So I think all of that comes beautifully together tonight in the discussions that I'm very much looking forward to having with my fellow panelists. Now, this year is important for ESA for two reasons. First of all, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the founding of ESA. The UK is a founding member. 50 years ago, ESA was formed from the merger of the European Launch Organization and the European Space Research Organization. And those two came together. So that really means that the science program is the 50-year-old backbone of the agency. And I stress that because we want that to be a strong backbone for the coming 50 years. Now, this year is also important because this is the year when we bring together the 23, it's 22 members until January. Slovenia joined as a full member in January. And we bring the ministers, you might be able to notice a UK minister here. I think he may be in the audience. And we bring our ministers together once every 3 years. And our Director General, Joseph Aschbacher, goes with a full proposal for the funding of our agency, of which the science program is a component. And I love this picture because it's incredibly inspiring. Whatever your political background is, whatever is happening in your member state, these ministers came together and said space is important, and they uplifted the European Space Agency budget by 17%. Science budget increased by 13%. And this was against the face of unprecedented increase in cost of living, the Ukraine war, and this for me is a very inspiring photograph. We're hoping we'll have similar success this November, and again, we have a very challenging and interesting geopolitical context. So for the science program, it is a mandatory component. So when you invest as a member state, you are automatically enrolled into this program and you automatically get benefit back. Now that's wonderful for the cohesion and the ownership and the sense of belonging. It's a huge challenge for me because I have 23 countries that I have to get to all agree and move in the same direction and deliver to all of their diverse budgets, interests, industry components, scientific interests and objectives. I also have to make sure that they get their return on investment. And I think at any one moment, at least three countries don't have a government. So we're not quite sure who the ministers are coming in November, but it keeps it interesting and exciting. So simply put, the objective of the science program is to enable European leadership in frontier breakthrough science and technology to empower member states to lead in global space science. And we are global leaders, and I want to stress that. We have an incredible mission called Euclid, and I had a colleague recently who met a friend who knows nothing about space or science, and he said, that Euclid mission is amazing, and we worked really hard on the comms, right? ESA-led mission, world-leading cosmology, phenomenal imagery, and his friend said, why can't ESA do something like that? NASA's so cool. Okay, it's the Apollo feature. So we work wonderfully well with NASA, and we long to be known as, have you heard of NASA? It's the American ESA. So it is a mandatory program. As I say, the Ministerial Conference for our budget set our budgets 3+2. And that gives a long-term sustainability, which is particularly important for industry because you know that I have a minimum of a 10-year business plan. So if you want to build your labs, you want to build a test facility, you know that you can plan for the bids that you want to put into the program. Our long-term implementation plan is guided by the scientific community bottom-up process. It's a science strategy. Previous strategy was Horizon 2000. The current one we're completing now is Cosmic Vision. And the new one that we want to kick off this November is Voyage 2050. That bottom-up process means that, as I say, our scientists compete ruthlessly to have their missions selected. Companies of all sizes compete to win the bid, both on technical and price, and all of that comes together. And that means that we deliver really iconic missions at very, very efficient affordability. Now, one of the things I've also heard about the science program was, well, it's great to do science, but what about economic benefit? And some people have different opinions. If I talk about economic leverage, people say, oh, don't talk about that stuff. Money, money, money. We want to talk about science. If you speak to a minister, you need to speak about money. Our economists did an analysis of all the optional programs and the mandatory programs, and for 2.9 billion euros worth of real cash investment into European industry that my program made over the last 3 years, there was an additional 3.3 billion leverage of GDP growth, an additional billion of taxes and 40,000 job years created. And that was equal impact across the optional and the science program. So don't say we do science because we like to do that, but we don't get economic benefit. You get both. And as I say, because of that need to drive that competition in industry so that I can control my costs and deliver maximum science for the money. Now, this might be a little bit small to see at the back. We always talk about excellence in science because that's the prerequisite for this program, but what we've done for the ministerial, we went through each of the member states' government strategic priorities, and we mapped in reverse which bits of the science program actually deliver to those strategies. And so this is something we're giving to all of our member states. So when you do the science program, of course you get world-leading science, but you also get all of these too, which was a really nice exercise. The governance you can see here, as I say, because the science program is the backbone of the agency and was really set down in the convention. On the left-hand side, you can see the plenary subordinate bodies. These were set down by the convention, the finance committee, the security committee, industrial policy, international relations, and particularly the science program committee. So each country sends delegates to our science program committee. And that science program committee oversees the work that I and my executive do. So we have science advice from the science community, and our science committees advise me, and I'm the delegate of our DG. And then we take those proposals and we build the program with our science program committee. And as I say, the other optional programs then sit on the right-hand side for their advisory bodies. This was last year's budget, 7.88 billion across the agency, and you can see here the science program. If you look at all of the missions we deliver, you'll see how very efficient it is. That's 8% of the agency's budget. It's a tiny amount. It's obviously been shrinking as the agency has grown. And so I'm really making the case this year for a modest uplift so that we can really invest in the technology development that we need for the coming decades. We also have a small optional program. This is called Prodex that we lead from my directorate. That's coming up to about 230 million now. This is for our member states to be helped to develop the payloads, because you do that in your countries, you develop the instruments, you might do that in your universities, you might do that in small companies. This program program allows you to put the money in between the ministerials. The money comes straight back to your companies, so it's not shared across the 23. You can have direct control over it, and it helps you to de-risk the payload and make sure that you have help from my engineers to do that. Now, I wanted to show you what Europe was capable of 20 years ago, because this was the anniversary in January of the landing 20 years ago on the moon of Saturn, Titan. This is not an artificial intelligence movie. This is a real series of images as the probe was landing. Now, if you speak to the PIs of that mission, they were told by the project manager at ESA, you're not allowed to call this a lander, because it was destined to crash. And it didn't crash, it landed, it settled, and it took photographs of not boulders, but actually frozen methane, big chunks of frozen methane. This remains humanity's most distant ever planetary landing, ever. Now, why I tell you this story is because these were European ideas, but Europe at that point did not have the capability to do a full mission to the outer solar system, and so NASA stepped in and developed the Cassini mission, and it was Europe that provided the probe, the atmospheric descent probe, which actually ultimately turned into a lander. 10 years later, Europe could do this alone, and this was the iconic Rosetta mission. So ESA led this. This was a mission that went out, chased a comet. Comets don't have enough gravity to hold onto your spacecraft, so you have to fly very clever dynamics, and then landed the little Philae probe. And again, these are the real images of the Philae lander landing on the surface of a comet and measuring all the weather. Absolutely incredible. So you can see the development within 10 years, what our scientific and our industry communities were able to do for us. And then we take that big iconic mission, we make it more efficient, and now it's a fast mission. So we're developing a mission that will launch in 2028 to go out, to loiter in deep space, and then when it finds a pristine comet that's coming from the outer edges of the solar system, it will launch itself in deep space, chase the comet, and release 2 little probes. And that's now one of our fast, inexpensive missions. So you can see how we continually innovate on efficiency. Now, this has scrambled the text a little bit, but in short, the program now covers everything from near-Earth heliophysics out to measuring the fundamental nature of space-time. We develop new technologies, we develop new methods, new engineering, new ways of working, and new flight and orbital dynamics, and also that deep technology transfer back into our industries. For the solar system, you can see on the bottom, these are the missions we've flown in the past. The data are now in our archives in my establishment in Spain. The middle ones are the ones we're flying at the moment. That includes with our NASA colleagues, for example, James Webb Space Telescope and Hubble. And in the top, these are the missions we have in development. Now, the reason I'm asking for a budget uplift this year is because my teams did an analysis, and I suddenly realized, I don't know how this was missed, but if we don't start to invest in the technology development now with our companies, the sky is empty in 2040. Now, that sounds quite far away, but it's not for space science missions, and so that's really the imperative. We launched this mission this year. We hope this is a Chinese-European Space Agency collaboration. And again, our member states said, could you please do this as an experiment to see whether it's possible to work collaboratively with China? So this will actually study the impact of the sun on our magnetosphere around the Earth that protects us from the solar radiation. So this is actually in the Netherlands at the moment. We hope to ship this to Carole to fly just before or after Christmas during solar maximum. And since it's such a sunny day, I wanted to show you some pictures of the sun. We have this wonderful mission called Solar Orbiter. All of our missions operate in the most extreme conditions: deep space, hot temperatures, cold temperatures, magnetic fields, particle fluxes, radiation. But of course, we're making really deep scientific measurements of the sun, and then ultimately colleagues in the agency then take those scientific results and start to use them for things like planetary defense. So you see those downstream applications. We even measure how the sun rotates. And of course, this is what the sun looks like if you really look at it actively. Never look with a naked eye, of course. The exquisite resolution of the instruments we have on board here, we're really unpicking how the sun works, both in quiescence and also in outburst. At the moment, it's going into solar maximum, and that's what the SMILE mission will study. But we've actually been able to study in great detail the actual surface of the sun and how the solar wind behaves. But the reason this mission is special is because the first time ever, we're starting to tilt the orbit so that the mission actually flies and will give us humanity's first ever view of the poles of the sun. This is something the US Decadal Survey and Heliophysics decided was something that they have an ambition to do in the coming years. China's also trying to do this, but this is a European world first, and the flight dynamics of this are pretty hard. And we never miss an opportunity to do science. We use the gravitational slingshot around Venus, and as we went around Venus, we also took some measurements of Venus. We care about Venus because we're developing a mission to go there in 2031. This is a fantastic mission that will actually study everything from the upper atmosphere of the planet right down to its core. It's a very hostile environment. It's a twin of Earth. It's 420 Celsius on the surface and about 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, and we don't know why. The picture in the background was actually just a photograph I took as I was coming into land in Paris. And it was quite sunny above, and it was really not sunny on the ground, but I thought maybe this is what it's going to feel like for Envision when it gets to Venus. Now, to give you a sense of the hostile environments we're used to operating in, this is Bepi Colombo. This is a wonderful mission between ESA and the Japanese Space Agency. On loop in the top left-hand corner, you can see that little black dot is Mercury passing the limb of the sun. So although we tend to show the photographs of Mercury as a grey rock with a black background, that's really the operating environment. It's hot as hell, it's really hostile, and in fact, it's caused us a lot of engineering challenges with the power transfer from the solar panels. We don't yet have the root cause, but we've had to do some very, very clever flights. We've done a lot of gravitational assists. We've been swinging by the planet. Gradually in 2026, we'll settle into orbit. We'll release 2 probes. But with just 30 minutes of flyby data, we've already mapped all the magnetic fields of Mercury. So again, you're getting the science even before the science operations start. We also took the first ever thermal mid-infrared photographs of the surface of Mercury. There are minerals there. We don't know what they are, but the mission will tell us what they are. It's a bit like flying into a pizza oven. The other extreme is the outer solar system. We launched this mission in 2023. It's a great name. It's called JUICE, and there's all sorts of public outreach and stuff we did with school kids and cocktails, not alcoholic cocktails. It's a Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer, and the big question that we're trying to answer here is whether the icy moons of Jupiter could be habitable for life. We won't seek life because we won't land, but the idea that life emerged from the salty oceans on the Earth, and we think there are liquid salty oceans under the icy crusts. But again, lots of innovations, lots of instruments packed onto this mission, the world's largest solar panels built by Airbus. So again, lots of European and lots of British involvement in this. Very complex flight dynamics. We didn't have a rocket that was powerful enough to go straight to Jupiter, but we'll use the free energy of gravity, and we'll do these incredible gravity assists around the planets. The first gravity assist we did last year between the Earth and the Moon. We took lots of data as we flew by the moon, so I don't like to boast, but we did a free lunar mission just on the side as we went past. And we also looked back at the Earth. Now, it was important for the scientists to switch all their instruments on, and they pointed at the Earth, and obviously they want a baseline. If they're going to test for habitability at Jupiter, they better look at the planet that we know most about. And I'm thrilled to announce that the plots on the right-hand side prove that Earth is habitable. For now, long may that last. So we bring all of this together, and what we're really hoping to do with this ministerial is start to develop, to get the funding to start the technology development to the big flagship mission that we will fly. Now, are there any ministers in the room? Hands up, ministers. Electoral cycles, yeah, okay, so I'm going to blow your mind away with dates. We must land on Enceladus, where we think is the best chance for life, in 2052. Now, calm, I know there are a few elections between then and now. 2052, which means we must launch in 2043 because we get the alignments of the planets. We have to land in 2052 because that's when the South Pole will be illuminated by the sun. It's the seasons. We must land then. The cosmos sets the deadline, which means we launch in 2043, which means we must have all of the technology at technology readiness 5 or above and all of our industries ready to bid by 2034. We're already halfway through 2025. Now, we've got to miniaturize the technology. We've got to work with the biotech sector to make sure that we can sense life. We're not going to do a sample return mission. This will be the first ever astrobiology laboratory landed on a distant planetary body, and we will seek signs of life directly. We'll fly through the plumes, we will land on the surface, and it's a hell of a terrain. So that's why we need a modest uplift in the budget so that we can start to develop the proper technology. We already have a mission concept and we know what we need to do, and we've been very pragmatic. We're not going to any kind of fantasy technology. All of this is pretty much feasible right now-ish. And we extrapolate this to planets around the rest of the universe because, of course, we're not the only solar system, so we are searching for habitable exoworlds, and we also use all of the data to help our astrophysicists cross-fertilize their physics, because all of these environments will tell us a lot about physics. So, as I say, you've seen some of these missions that I've mentioned. Plato and Ariel are 2 exoplanet missions. Plato will look for Earth-like planets around sun-like stars. Are we alone in a new sense? Ariel will study the atmospheric chemistry of over 1,000 exoplanets, so we'll start to do climate change on other worlds. And then LISA, which was adopted on the same day as Envision, biggest ever adoption, so our member states said, please go and spend 2.65 billion euros and implement these missions. LISA will be the first ever space-based gravitational wave interferometer, and the technology makes your eyes water. Now, Professor Jerry Gilmore walked out of the Royal Society, and I don't know if he's going to watch the recording, but I'm giving him a name check, because this mission really was one of his babies, and we put this to sleep. So we not only do new things, but we also end things. And this was a very poignant moment. You tend to want to see these signals when you are launching a mission and seeing whether your mission is alive. but actually pacifying or putting a mission to sleep is also quite a poignant thing. But we put it into a safe orbit because we also have a very strong sustainability strategy at ESA. I'm not even going to go through these. It's revolutionized the way we do astrophysics. It's superlatives in every discovery space, and we now understand the past, present, and future of our own Milky Way galaxy. And the reason I wanted to show you this as a huge European lead, because it's some years, it's about 20 years of discovery. Now, over 2,000 years, people care about navigation, you want to know where you're flying your ships to. So all the way from Hipparchus back in 150 BC, over more than 2,000 years, there was about 1,000 times improvement in the precision of navigation and mapping where stars were on the sky. Then Europe went to space, and we got a 10,000-fold improvement in 25 years, an absolute revolution, because we were up in space. There are some things you can only do from space. And now we have the whole celestial reference frame, and we're helping satellites like Galileo to do their precision measurement and timing. Also revolutionized astrophysics, so we obviously measure all the KPIs for the high-quality publications, and this is just a collection of the papers that we've collected across our missions, partner-led missions and European-led missions, and of course you can see Gaia blows all the records away. But it's also helping people work cross-platform and start to do interdisciplinary science with archival data. And for free, apart from studying the Milky Way, it's called our billion-star mapper, Gaia accidentally studied 156,000 asteroids in the solar system. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in our solar system, 350 of which were found to have moons. So again, free science that comes out, huge value for money. And perhaps most excitingly for me as a black hole astrophysicist, the discovery of new black holes in our own Milky Way galaxy. Now, we've known that the center of our galaxy has a central supermassive black hole, about 3 million times the mass of the sun. But what Gaia showed was that we have these black holes that are about 10, 20, 30 times the mass of our sun wandering through our galaxy. There's probably hundreds of these things, and we didn't know they were there. We found them because of the tiny wobbles of stars on their paths around the Milky Way. And Gaia was so precise, it said that star's wobbling a little bit, and you can then map these hidden black components. Now, the black holes are important because we think we don't know how to produce them yet. We don't have the theory for that yet. But when things merge together, these binary mergers will actually be the cosmic calibrators for our LISA interferometer. 3 spacecraft will be launched. They'll be identical. We'll have test masses on each that should not know they're flying on a spacecraft. They will fly in an equatorial triangle on an Earth-Sun orbit separated by 2.5 million kilometers. Just imagine that. And they will be precisely aligned with lasers to within an accuracy of a proton. And when actual ripples in space-time disturb the spacecraft and slightly change the length of the arms, we'll then detect the nature of space-time. The dark universe also is very much at the core of our Euclid mission, which is an optical infrared mission that we launched again in 2023. And the question it's trying to answer is, what's the nature of 95% of the universe? 5% is normal matter, dust, gas, stars, you and I. 95% is dark matter, dark energy, and we'll also study the coupling between those. Again, big European first. Silicon carbide was the material that we developed in Europe, first of all for the Herschel mirror, then for the Gaia spacecraft, now for Euclid, and also the instruments that we provided to NASA for James Webb Space Telescope. Incredible optics. We had a tiny bit of ice on the visible camera. It really upset our cosmologists, so we defrosted it, and the thickness of that ice was thinner than a strand of DNA. So again, phenomenal sensitivity. And we always transfer the technology. So this silicon carbide technology, it's very light, it's very structurally stiff, and it's very thermally stable. So it's now in Earth observation missions. It's in multiple other different commercial satellites as well. You can look on our website and see the beautiful images. I apologize to Adam. I promised to give him a pretty picture, and I accidentally deleted it, but that's a taste at the top. 9 billion galaxies, 1.5 billion, which will be used by our astrophysicists to study the nature of dark matter and dark energy. They will come up with one answer. There'll be one number. It'll be W. Please don't grumble at them. It'll be 6 solid years and 170 petabytes to get to that number, and it's a global competition to get to that number. But I always say 1.5 billion galaxies for about 1.4 billion euros invested in your industries, 90 cents a galaxy, less than the price of a cup of coffee. The hot universe, half of that 5% of ordinary matter is at more than 1 million degrees. We don't know why. XMM Newton is another wonderful European mission that celebrated its 25th anniversary this year. But we're building the world's largest X-ray telescope. This will be world-beating. We will launch in the mid to late 2030s. And again, European leadership, small, medium enterprises, and our large primes. I mentioned the PRODEX program. The UK is not part of this because you have other ways of doing this, but 17 of our participating states use us to give them the technical confidence to put the money into their industries, particularly to de-risk their payload development. Can barely scratch the surface of the technology development that we help our member states develop through this. But all in all, that means that our missions then run very well on time, on cost, and on quality. And it's important that we keep that, because otherwise we then disappoint our science communities and they lose their competitiveness. We also help our member states with particular focus cases. So, for example, this was accelerometers that started to be developed for the ExoMars program. Obviously, UK has a big component there, into our Plato missions. And it's now actually something that was for the Irish. They very much wanted to develop non-dependence. And non-dependence, again, is a big theme, I think, in the current economic conditions. So we now have a business plan for our ministerial for 25, for 28, and for 31. Again, long-term sustainable planning. We have some key components that we're putting into our proposal, particularly finishing and developing those missions that our member states have asked us to deliver. We have 3 new M-class missions. The Euclid is an M-class mission that are in competition. Again, UK is very heavily involved in those. And we obviously want to develop the starting technology blocks for that L-class mission. Again, we model this in great detail, how we will implement all of this, because we're financially accountable every 3 months to our member states, because it's a mandatory program, and we've got the full development out to 2045. Over just the next few years, though, we've got a very detailed plan for industry opportunities, and again, we're having a workshop at the beginning of May in STEC, so if you are from industry, please reach out, and we can invite you to these workshops so you can learn how to bid if you've not done it before, or you can learn about the opportunities. And then we also have some calls for proposals out to our science community, because we have to prime the pump and make sure that the process continues to develop so that we all have a very solid and positive future. Thank you for your patience, and I'm very looking forward to having questions and discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation. A very persuasive public expenditure bid we've just had. Very persuasive. Right, excellent. Now we're going to hear from Professor Adam Amara. Oh, sorry, before to him, I should have reminded people, of course, especially for our online participants, do remember to put in your questions on Slido. I'm sure you've gone to Slido, and the number is the hashtag, there it is on the screen, 1408852. So now we have Professor Adam Amara, who is the Chief Scientist at the UK Space Agency, also Professor of Cosmology at the University of Surrey. We're delighted to have him as part of our Space Agency team. He leads our scientific work at the Space Agency. Over to you, Adam.
Great, thank you very much for having me here. It's wonderful to be here. I think the first time I was in this building was for celebrations. I believe we're both Wilson Fellows in the past. Yeah, very good. It's brilliant to be here. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go, so we've had the whistle-stop tour of all of the fantastic things that we do in science. What I'd like to do is connect this with what it can do for the UK and how we can capitalize on these things. And I'll end with Euclid, a case study of what I believe good looks like. And let's begin, though. I'm a space nerd, and I believe that space has woven itself into the fabric of our culture. People grow up, and on a hot sunny day like this, I bet many of you would have seen people wearing NASA t-shirts as they walk around, and I'll come back to that theme a little bit later. So I feel very lucky to have the job that I have. I get to work with fantastic civil servants trying to deliver amazing programs, great leadership in Europe trying to coordinate our activities, and go out and talk to industry partners about how we can do space better. And in all of this, what I've done is I've found that the space sector has been very welcoming and very open to new ideas. It's quite an incredible community for those of you that would like to join us. And when we talk about the science programs and the exploration programs, there's something special about government-funded space science programs. They aim to do the things that feel impossible, the things that are hard to quantify the risks for, the things that seem beyond our capabilities, and the idea is we take these risks, we make amazing discoveries, we pioneer innovation, and then after that, industry can follow and commercialize and make things a lot more efficient. But this idea is that space science drives the bleeding edge, and it isn't only the NASA on the T-shirt that does it. You're completely right, Carole. We do a lot of that here. And maybe you're right, we don't sing enough about it, and we need to do a better job. But if done well, a science program will pave the way for new discoveries, and I think Euclid's well on its way, as well as all of those other missions. If done well, it will inspire and uplift the public. And again, we see that time and again, that even though the science bit of a space program is quite small, 8%, I bet most of the publicity, the bit that captures the people's imagination, is more around the science than the other bits of the program. This resonates strongly with people. And if done well, the space program can unravel the mysteries of the cosmos and push economic innovation. So what does good look like? A good science program pioneers new discoveries, that's a given, but the scale of these programs is so big that we do have to be mindful that we do need to take the public with us. We do need to capture their imagination. These need to be big, important questions that people care about. As well as that, we need to, in terms of the UK position, we need to use existing strength to position ourselves in a leadership role. And I think that's an important part of when we join missions. But as well as doing that, we need to use that capability to grow new capabilities so we're future leaders in future missions. And what we have done in the UK participation in the science programs is driven technology. And why that's important is because we go back to this point that the technology innovators live amongst us. They're part of our culture, they're part of our ecosystem, and they're not boffins living in the US working for NASA. And again, we need to communicate that better. And one of the reasons we need to do that is that space is a massive, consistently growing sector. It's projected to hit $1 trillion by 2030. And within the UK, we've had consistent, steady growth in the space sector at about 8%, whatever metric you choose to measure, revenue, jobs, number of companies, regardless of what the economy's doing. We've been growing very strong, and I believe I read a quote that Lord Willetts said recently, we're at an inflection point. How serious are we about the future of our space sector? We have challenges that we need to tackle. Amazing for me that one of the challenges is skills gap. I hear skills gap every time I talk to a company. We're struggling to find skills, which for me is weird. Almost every 8-year-old I talk to loves space and dinosaurs, right? So how have we failed? And when I go around to schools and I talk to heads and career advisors, they are shocked to discover that living amongst us are these people pushing innovation at the global scale, because they assumed it was boffins in the US doing it for NASA. So we've got to reverse this message, and we need to be proud of our achievements and make a bigger song and dance of what we have done. We have pioneered technology. If I just focus on a little area of the astrophysics of the universe, we've pioneered imaging technology. So the detectors that Gaia flew, the biggest digital camera ever launched into space, built here in the UK. That led us to Euclid, which is the most precise imager, wide field imager out there. Again, this is UK technology. Through earlier missions, Planck and Herschel, we've built these bolometers, which measure the small temperature changes in their detectors, which allow us to build now thermal imaging cameras better than anybody else. Again, British technology. Cryogenics have been pushed. Drag-free flight have been pushed. Laser LiDAR have been pushed. All of these, we have world leaders around us, and we need to do a better job. We know that we've got great scientists. One of the problems I think we struggle with is singing from the same hymn sheet and building a united front between the incredible science that we do. And it doesn't matter which of these domains that Carole showed. Any one of those, I can point to somebody in the UK who's a world-leading expert in that area, whether it's Jupiter, whether it's Mars, whether it's a galaxy, whether it's the Milky Way, whether it's dark energy. So we've got great scientists. But we can't work separate to our industrial partners, and we need to do a better job of pulling that through. And we have some challenges in our industrial landscape. We have challenges around low production volume of highly complicated hardware. This makes it very hard for companies to invest in the innovation that they can turn into a commercial product that's long-term commercially viable. We have funding cycles that have gaps in them, and that causes a feast and famine issue for some of our companies. We need to understand how to address that. I've talked about skills and retention, and there's some easy wins that we could do there. And then there's financial pressures and fragmentation of our ecosystem. But we can do things to improve these. So I'm very happy Carole has led a lot of work on ESA to do the long-term implementation plan, to look at what the program will look like and how to fill in the gaps to make sure we've got steady programs coming forward. And what we're seeing is more and more diversity in the programs, from the large missions to medium missions. The F3 is now the fast missions, and now a new category, mini F, so allowing more people to enter the space race. We need better engagement between academics and industrial engineers, and this is somewhere where ESA is a difficult place for us to do that in the science program, because understandably ESA puts itself in between the scientists and the industrial study for good reason. But other countries augment their ESA involvement with additional programs, and this is something we haven't necessarily been good at doing in the past, but I'm happy to say the Space Agency is doing more, and we've started new bilateral programs that have allowed those things. And I know we were talking some of the industrial partners in here about things that we could do there. The other important thing is early engagement in missions. If we wait till a mission is adopted by ESA, it's very difficult for us to then lead, even if we have the best scientists, even if we have the best engineers. Usually it's very mature, and it's hard to make a big inway into leadership. And so let me end with, I'm going to talk about Euclid in detail as a case study for what I think success looks like. So I was very lucky. I joined the Euclid team back when we were two scientists and 3 engineers in 2005. I've said this in past talks. David Southwood over there did a lot of the complex maneuvering high up at ESA to make sure that the project worked. In the middle of that, I was down in the coal mines, carving away, trying to understand the science performance. And so for 6 years, I led the science team from that team of 5 to hundreds, and now it's thousands of people doing incredible work. And I think there were a lot of lessons that I can take away from that experience. The first is what I said, early engagement. Now, at the time, this was not a UK strength. So even though myself and the PI at the time met in Cambridge, we went to France in order to do the early studies, and that really put France in a strong position. But by doing that, you really had, in the early days, the ability to shape everything about the mission from a blank sheet of paper. And that's such a valuable place to get in to secure leadership and make sure your technology transfers into. And again, I think things have changed a lot in the UK, and again, the Space Agency is doing a lot to enable the new future scientists the opportunities to get in early and think about their mission ideas. I would like to say that when we started thinking about Euclid, we were thinking about it as a small mission run by one country. So technically, the study failed. We didn't do a good job. But we ended up with a fantastic mission concept that we could then go to ESA with when the Cosmic Vision program came along, and we ended up winning that competition, and that led to the other thing. So even a study that technically failed can end up being massively successful. What was incredible about the early days of Euclid is CNES funded industry to work with us. Now, at the time, I didn't know a lot about space engineering, but we had an incredible team from Astronomy. What I discovered later was their A-team, the best of the best. And it was an electric, very exciting phase that we went through. It's very difficult to replicate that level of engagement. And I did ask, how is it there's this tiny little study that doesn't cost very much, done by one member state? How are we getting the A-team? And what I heard was that's how they keep the A-team. Because no matter how exciting you are at your day job, after a while, things can get monotonous. So what they do is periodically, they let the A-team go out and work with crazy scientists on a crazy science idea that may or may not work out. But that's how they keep their workforce interested, engaged, and happy. So 5 years ago, when I moved to the UK and I started talking about setting up a similar concurrent design facility, I was very impressed that Airbus said the same thing. They were willing to engage in these teeny tiny studies that wouldn't bring them money because it would keep their workforce happy. So these are the sorts of things we need to think creatively about when we think about talent retention and how do we do that. The other thing that I learned from Euclid is you've got to be bold and cheeky. So when we started thinking about a European-led dark energy mission, what you have to know is it was understood at the time that this was something that only America did. America has led except for Euclid, every dark energy experiment. And it was seen as preposterous, the idea that Europe would have a leadership position. Now, thankfully, many of us thought that that was something we should have a crack at anyway, and it turns out we have designed, I think, an incredible dark energy experiment mission. We were able to do that because we built on heritage. The Astronomy team had worked on Gaia. When they came up with their original design, it was a Gaia++ in terms of stability and all the things that we could do. We built on our heritage in science. In Europe, and especially the UK at the time, we were world leaders in a technique called weak gravitational lensing, which allows you to measure the tiny distortions of those billions of galaxies. So we had a leadership in technology that we were able to leverage, and we had a leadership in science. So that was very good. That did the job that we needed to. And what it led to for the UK, even though we missed that early boat, we could have run it from the UK. Because we had the heritage of building the Gaia instrument, because we had the incredible science team, we were then able to lead major parts of the instrument. What Euclid will do is incredible. So it's true, it's one number, it's W, the equation of space, state parameter of dark energy. We set a very simple target, measure W to % precision. If you haven't tried to measure W, you may not realize how crazy a proposition that is, but we're going to do it, and it's going to take thousands of people, and it's going to take 10 years. And what that'll tell us is a fundamental thing about the rate at which the universe expands and unravel important things about our cosmic origins. And again, the kind of thing that people resonate with. So to end with, I said that a good experiment does pioneering discoveries. Euclid, tick, absolutely it will. I said that a good experiment will capture the public's imagination, and we've seen already with the early data that it absolutely does. I said that a good experiment should leverage existing strengths, and for the UK, it certainly did on the instrument, and it certainly did on the science. And then I said that a good experiment should develop new future strengths. So the question is, where are the future strengths for the UK from the Euclid experiment? Now, I think it's going to be in the data, because the data needs of Euclid are absolutely enormous. And we haven't quite got to the bottom of what it is that we need to really develop as we iron out our measurements. And I think one thing we might need to look at in the space agency is how do we make sure that we transfer all of that innovation, because it's very close to what we do as academics. We may not realize that we need to do it. How do we transfer that innovation into industry the same way that we do for hardware? All right, so I'll end there and happy to take questions later.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Adam. We'll invite you back to present your result on what W is. We look forward to that. We'll book it in the diary now for 6 years' time. Let me now turn to our next speaker, Dr. Tudor Williams, who serves as the Chief Technology Officer at Filtronic. Before that, he was the Technical Director at the Compound Semiconductor Application Catapult. And I should report a fascinating session when we invited Gwynne Shotwell over, the COO, the lady who runs SpaceX. And the aim, what we were trying to do was to get her to open up the SpaceX supply chain to more British companies. And I pressed her on this, and she spent the following 5 minutes telling me how wonderful Filtronics was, as an example of how they had great British companies at the heart of their supply chain. So it's wonderful that we're going to hear from Filtronics today.
So good evening, everyone. Really pleased to be here tonight and to be invited to talk, and very pleased to sponsor such an interesting event. And I have to admit, I've got a bit of imposter syndrome in here. We've had two really good speakers already talking about space science. And I should point out before we start that we haven't done any space missions yet. So, Filtronic haven't actually done anything yet in that sphere. But we do have aspirations. I think it's got an important part to play in the future of our company, so I'll explain why later on. I thought I'd start by talking a bit about Filtronic's journey into this market. We're very new, so you may never heard of Filtronic, and we've grown very fast in that arena. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how you access that new market. It's very daunting, I think, when you're a company outside that space industry to work out how do you get in there, how do you play in that space, and it seems a very, very big step. So I'm going to talk a bit about our journey into space and what it's done for the company, how we're going, and then I'll end up talking a little bit about how I think science missions can play a part of that future for Filtronic. So here's where we are. So what do we do? We make RF and microwave subcomponents, parts for payload systems, parts for ground systems. So we're making that comms link. So typically the very high frequency data link between the satellite and ground, or the ground and satellite, so hardware in that sphere. And we're a company that's been in the RF and microwave domain for a very long time, so over 40 years. Startup that span out of Leeds University a long time ago, originally doing filters, hence the name. But I've done many things over time, very, very much involved in telecoms for a long time. And that's kind of, that telecoms piece and defense piece is where I started. When I started in the company 3.5 years ago, we had no space business at all, so we didn't do any business in space. It's now by far the biggest part of our business. So we've gone on a journey from being no space at all to actually having a company that's really focused on that space piece with the defense alongside it. And some of the sort of figures are there. When I started, we were sort of ticking along at about £16 million a year revenue. That grew to 25.4 million last year. And the market estimate this year is 50.2 million. So really, really rapid growth. And alongside that, growing the team as well, which is never easy. We talked about skills just earlier on, and we've grown from 110 people to 180 people in about the last 12 months. And within that, there's a lot of engineering content, so that's going from 30 people up to 80 people. So a lot of engineering talent to find across the UK. And part of the way to do that, I think, we're a northeast company, headquartered in the northeast of England. We have a factory up in the northeast of England. We've also had to have satellite operations then throughout the UK to try and attract the best talent to come into Filtronic and help us with the design space. Another part of that journey for us in terms of growth, we're moving to a new head office. So we have a site on Net Park in Sedgefield in County Durham. And we're just about to move in later on this year to another bigger factory. So it'll be twice the size and six times the manufacturing capability to try and grow with the business. So we've seen this massive growth. And I guess what's given us the ability to do that is what people term the new space market. So it's this flip away from geo-type satellites, which are very complex, very hard to make, very long time scales, to a new market where we have massive constellations of thousands of satellites potentially. So people like SpaceX we've mentioned already. I'll mention a bit about SpaceX later on and how we got in with them. But they've really flipped the market on its head for that comms-based satellites. So there's these broadband constellations, the communication satellites, has really been thrown on its head, which is good for someone like us because we'd never have the opportunity to get into that market without that. What they're looking for now is a complete shift in what they're asking for companies. It's now not the highest quality, but what they need is a minimal viable product that will work over a lifespan of 7 or 10 years in low Earth orbit and will do the job. So we come from a volume manufacturing telecoms background. We've leveraged that knowledge, that technology, all the things you've learned in that industry in terms of scaling volume, scaling manufacture, how we've transitioned that into the space market. Just jumped twice. So talking a bit about SpaceX, and so this was our first steps into the space market, really, actually, and that's a pretty big one. We're a big company. It's on the ground segment, first of all. That's the easiest one to get into. So the ground segment is less challenging, obviously, than payload. And again, I'll come on to that as our growth journey continues later on. But we're working with SpaceX, and we announced a strategic partnership with SpaceX in April last year. That's a pretty big deal, I think. You don't hear many companies announcing partnerships with SpaceX. They are massively vertically integrated Everything they can do themselves in-house, they will do in-house. So that means what we're doing is pretty special, I think, at Filtronic. We have some real core capabilities here in the UK, in a fairly small SME company that are competing with the best in the world, really, at doing what they're doing. So we were chosen, it says there, for our leading performance and millimeter wave solutions. So we work at very high frequency. And because we come from that communications background, we've always had to be at the leading edge. You always have to be at the cutting edge of technology, because to be viable in the comms market, you have to be doing something pretty niche in the UK. Everything else gets done in Asia, where the cost point is lower. So for the last 10, 15 years in that market, we've been progressing our technology really at the cutting edge of that technology and developing very high frequency links. So the stuff we're selling into SpaceX, for example, is E-band, amongst other things. But E-band is 71 to 86 gigahertz. It's a very, very high frequency. It's very hard to manufacture, or very hard to design, first of all. But then you have to manufacture it and scale up manufacture the volume. It's very difficult to do. There's lots of people who can make one or two of these things, and probably SpaceX among them. But then to scale that into real true volume and actually be able to do that for a full constellation of satellites is pretty hard to do. And there's some nice words there from Mike Nichols at SpaceX, basically saying that we've been a really good partner for them. They move very quickly, and that's why they've turned the industry on its head. SpaceX move really, really quickly, and we've managed to do that with them. So we've managed to flex our engineering capabilities, and while growing the team, like I said, from that 30 people to 80 people, it's pretty astounding, really. The engineering team kept up and managed to keep that pace with SpaceX and start that journey. So what next after the hardware, after the SpaceX stories? That's obviously given us a good platform. It's given us some good revenue growth and some good income for the company. What we have to do then is make that work for the company and expand beyond SpaceX to other constellations, to other satellite companies, and grow that business. And that's what we're working really hard to do now, and diversification is really key. So part of that diversification story is moving into payload. And thankfully, we had support from the UK Space Agency and ESA via the ARTES program to start to develop that hardware. And I think it's fair to say if we hadn't have had that support, we could never have done this project. We couldn't have taken on that level of risk and that level of investment without the support of ESA and UK Space Agency to do this work. And what it's allowing us to do now is build new building blocks, new capabilities that we can leverage into new markets. It's really transformational, I think, for the company. So we started an ESA ARTES program back in June 2024. Quite a big program, so 5.3 million euros, with 3.7 million of that funded by ESA. And beyond that monetary value as well, working with ESA has been really, really good. They have a whole team of engineers. So when you win funding from ESA, it's not just money on a plate and then go off and do it. They have a whole team working with you to develop that capability, to build up the skill sets, to build up the knowledge that sits behind that, to become a true space company. So really fundamental change from the funding we've had from that. So these are the sort of things we're developing on the right-hand side of the slide. So payload modules that sit in the satellite and then do that communication from satellite down to ground. So very high frequency data links, lots of data from satellite down to ground. So what's next on the horizon? And this is where we'll get finally to a bit of science vision, maybe. We have a crowded R&D roadmap at the moment. We have lots of people telling us they want to work with us. So we've got fairly famous, I think, in the space industry from our SpaceX contacts. So lots of people are talking to us. Lots of people are giving us ideas of where we should shape products. So we have a good R&D roadmap for space, and some good investment internally to fund those sort of programs. And we're focusing, to say, on the ground side and the payload side, but cross-domain and cross-frequency, so looking at different frequencies, actually moving down in frequency interestingly for space, whereas we were always moving up in frequency for telecoms. But there's market play there for us now at low frequencies where we can actually play in a good way. And then, obviously, opportunities across commercial and MilSatCom as well. So, we're keeping a watching brief on what the UK is doing in terms of the MilSat capability. And because of the sort of capability we have and the engineering skills and the manufacturing skills we have in a UK location, we think we're well placed, again, to play in that market. So in terms of future UK Space Agency and ESA programs, we just announced as a partner on Viasat's D2D program. So another ESA-funded program looking to get data from a satellite direct to your mobile phone. So quite exciting technology at the bleeding edge again of what people are doing. And it's really good to be involved in that new project and try and scale from there as well. So then science missions. I haven't mentioned them yet. We haven't done it yet. But we're really keen to be involved, actually, and for a number of reasons. And I think it was mentioned earlier on about that visibility of where to go and the time to actually invest in new technology that's going to be transformational. That's very hard to do for commercial companies. What they want is here and now. They're driving us to do things in 6 months' time, in 12 months' time. What we've got to keep an eye on as a company is what's in 5 years' time, what's in 10 years' time, what are we selling then? And these science programs give us that guidance. It's the cutting edge of technology. It gives us that time and money to invest in real good capability that we can then leverage into the commercial market and the defense markets as we go in 5 and 10 years' time. So that sort of visibility and all the work that ESA and UK Space do in trying to drive what the new technology looks like, what the next generation looks like, is giving that real feedback in real time to industry like us, telling us where we need to be, and then hopefully funding us and being involved in the program at that early stage, letting us build product, building blocks that we can then take into the commercial sphere and then turn into revenues as we go forward in time. So I'll probably stop talking and then we can have some questions and get some interaction going.
Great, thank you very much, Tudor. Brilliant, there we are. So Carole, you're there. Adam out the far end. Great, good. Well, 3 excellent presentations. Now an opportunity for you here to put your comments and questions. So who wants to start by setting the ball rolling? Yep, there we are. If we can get the microphone over there. Yeah. Thank you. And I'm also going to see if we've got anything on Slido. Right.
The name's John Lowe. Worked for a couple of engineers, Institution of Mechanical Engineers, and an industrial museum, which has a main focus, development of STEM skills in young people. And skills is what bothers me most. We've been struggling in this country to encourage STEM. I'd like the views on the panel on what we can do to actually not lose the enthusiasm that young people have at a very early age, then dies out as they seem to progress towards secondary education. What should we be doing additional to what we're doing now?
Tudor, in fact, you might touch on that. Tell us about your recruitment and your experiences in Filtronic.
Well, I presented some figures there, which are, I think, fairly impressive growth in a very short period of time. It's not always been that easy. I think we were lucky in this case that we had the whole space story and SpaceX story to help drive that growth, and I think that's really made a difference in our employment. But frankly, we've struggled for years, and as long as I can remember, like you say, STEM has been an issue, and getting good people into that industry has been an issue. What can we do differently? We've been talking about this for a long time, I guess. Part of it may be, trying to train trainers. So talk to the teachers, engage the teachers, get them interested in technology, get them to understand the application side and excite from their side. And they'll continue then to educate children, and they'll continue to educate the next generation beyond that, each year with that excitement. If we go into one class of children, we hit one class of children. If we hit one teacher, we can hit many, many classes of children. But I think that message has to be there, and keeping support for the good stuff we're doing at universities as well. I think a lot of universities are struggling at the moment. We're talking to people in academia. The funding is difficult for universities, so it's working out how we make sure that funding is maintained and focused in where we really excel in the UK. So it really ties back in my mind, to a larger strategy for the UK, and where we think we add real value, work that out, and then pass that down the line further back.
Thank you. Carole, your observations?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a perpetual question, as you say. I mean, now that I live in Spain, and obviously I support 23 member states, there's a real diversity in skill presence and skill deficit across those 23 countries. And I think for me, there's something almost about the prestige of the sector. You do see that interest, that spark. The youngest children, you know, of all backgrounds will be interested and inspired. There's something about accessibility, and I think there's also something about the visibility of professions. So obviously, you know, Filtronic is there needing that skill base. They're also busy doing their work, and, you know, they can engage, but then we actually need, I mean, your organization, I think, is a good link between those. I've also worked a lot on, obviously, the gender gap. So we're missing 50% of the population. There's a whole pile of talent that we are losing. I mean, when you speak to young girls at the age of 7, boys and girls, they're the same. Somehow when we get to 12, we're losing them. And I have colleagues in academia who are working with small groups and actually giving those young women real hands-on opportunities to touch the equipment, to go and build things. And they're just as keen. And Adam described himself as a space nerd. Yeah, we all are. But there's something cultural, I think, that it's not the done thing, or you just don't see women in the sector. And so I think visibility is very important. Spain, for me, feels a bit different. In some ways, it was behind probably the UK in terms of progression. Now I meet many senior women, very highly talented leaders in the engineering sector, the technology sector. And so I think we can turn it around, but it takes all of society. It takes parents to say, yes, I can imagine my child in that, rather than, oh, you know, engineering's oily rags and blokes with spanners. It's not. It's high tech. It's physics. It's maths. It's the cosmos. And ultimately, I think the salaries then have to match.
Yeah. Anything you want to add, Adam?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything that the panel has said. I think, for me, it boils down to two things. One is visibility. Can young people imagine themselves in this job? And I think we have not done a very good job of doing that. You know, they always imagine two things. It's boffins in the US, and that's because it boils down to money. They spend a significant fraction of a mission budget to communicate the benefits of the mission in the US. We don't do that in Europe. We don't spend the money in a significant way to connect with people. So when young Terry or Tina, I'm sure, go to their teachers and say, I want to go work in space, they probably get told to get a real job that will pay the mortgage, which is insane because there are lots of really good jobs that will pay the mortgage and are exciting. So I think we have a communication problem. And it's not only boffins. We need accountants, we need lawyers, we need technicians in the sector living in our community. So I think that's the first problem. The second problem I hear about skills gap is actually it's not always about new people coming into the sector with enthusiasm. What companies tell me, and I'm interested to hear, is what they're really lacking is an experience gap. There's not enough people who have touched hardware, done engineering, that they can employ and redeploy. So what they do is they're constantly pinching from each other. Now, the way you solve that is you create more opportunities. You just get people to do more engineering to build up that experience. So that's a different problem than, you know, boasting about the wonderful things that we do, and we do that locally, and, you know, you can pay the mortgage. We also need to create programs that build experience, not just classroom teaching. So I think those are the two things I would tackle.
Yeah, thank you very much. I see we've got, let's take a couple more interventions there, and then we'll move over to the other side of the room. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name's Anton Carole. I run the Startup to Scale Up Club. We simply work to help founders for free. With people like yourselves, they answer and the founders ask. A two-part quick question, if I may. Number one, should there be more work with universities, such as people like the Space Agency or yourselves, because there's a lot of innovation there, but they just don't have the commercial know-how. So what more can be done? And two, should there be perhaps some initiatives from the Space Agency to provide data, to provide other facilities you have? Because we get quite a few founders from the startup world that would love some of the stuff you have, and perhaps even have a go at your procurement for that matter. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much. And there was another question. Yes, just pass the microphone along to the lady there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Libby Jackson from the Science Museum, where I'm head of space. Picking up a little bit, of course, on the question we just had about inspiring futures, the Science Museum are very keen to do that. but we're also a non-departmental public body. And my question really to the panel is, how can we better join up these amazing things across government? How can wider public bodies support you all? Because I know to do all of this, it requires funding. And how can we all in the room help make the case so that everything you've been outlining today can be achieved in the coming years?
Adam, do you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that actually speak to both of them, which is we do have a bit of a fragmented ecosystem. I think that's not a surprise. Every report you'll read, our sector is fragmented, and we need to do a better job of cohering it, and I think that probably begins in government and then flows out. So I think there's a coordination, coherence angle. Remind me what the second bit of your question was?
How can everyone in the room help get you money?
Oh, well, I think we need to prioritize. So here's the thing. As a scientist, I'm trained that my number one audience is other scientists. So I sit in all of my committees, and my job is to direct as much money as possible to the scientists writing the paper for other scientists, right? That's the way we see it. And so I think that's a bit of a problem, because the people paying for the mission are a much broader stakeholder group that includes the entire public. And we need to change the mentality. There is a high value in communicating a science result to the science community. Absolutely. We live in a peer review world. But I think the Americans do it better. They value going out there and communicating why this is important to people. And that boils down to, what is the percent number of a mission? You know, how many postdocs are you prepared not to have doing the core science in order to deliver this broader message? And right now, I think in Europe, we've got the balance not quite right, and therefore, in the long run, we can't get more money into the program. So it's kind of short-term thinking.
Carole?
I would disagree slightly with Adam. I think the UK has a phenomenally strong public engagement culture. The museums, I mean, you know, the BBC, I travelled in China when I was Chief Scientific Advisor in the Foreign Commonwealth Office, and every plane I got on in China, David Attenborough's Blue Planet was playing. So in some ways, science is seeped into our culture. And I think that public service that our museums do on modest budgets, I think, is really valuable. And so I think you're right, Libby, that, you know, that is a hidden value. That is why young children are interested. It's why young kids are not afraid of science. It's why parents will go out and go to a science museum or a club on a Saturday. Now, I think, you know, connecting that to your question about startups and that capital that they don't have, that they want access to. So, I mean, if I can give you the ESA answer to this, we are developing, and this, again, this ministerial is something that we will bring very strongly through. We're further developing our help to new space, so particularly that SME environment. We have great facilities, we have great labs, we have the concurrent design facility where you can start to bring in those partners. We also have really strong investment from venture capitalists. So our Director General, Joseph Ashbacher, has really made this one of his top priorities. So I think you can see that starting up. Now, my question then to my UKSA colleagues is, how do we help you to connect your ecosystem to that? So it's not something that happens far away in a mystical European country somewhere, but you are a core member of this program. And my final comment is the ecosystem that you have here in the UK. Of course, you have UK Research and Innovation, which is the funding agency. It's the government body that brings together all of the research councils with Innovate UK. Now, you know, I think, again, it's a conversation for you to have as a country. How do you make that work? And this answers your point about the connection between top university professors who are not they may be spinning businesses off, but they also have core academic roles. And I think the merging of those research councils with Innovate UK to form this umbrella organisation some years ago, the whole point was to drive a more effective innovation pipeline from that fundamental research base, which in the UK is very strong, but the innovation pipeline could be stronger. So it's a question back, I think, to you in the room, where is that and where is that going? But I think there's real potential. The structures and the systems are there, and how do you make it more coherent now that we know what we want to do, how we're doing, and connect that up to leverage what you can get back from ESA.
Tudor, any advice on that? What are your links to local universities like? Are they a source of recruitment and research advice?
They're actually pretty good. when I came on board at Filtronic, one of the first things I did was try and establish better links to universities. I think they're fundamental to driving the progress of a company for a couple of reasons. Number one is people. We need good people to come into the company. And number two is the innovative stuff that's quite hard to do. So as a company, as I said before, I think we're really focused on the here and now over the next 1 or 2 years. And revenue generation, we're trying to grow the business. So how do we get that picture 5 years' time, 7 years' time, 10 years' time? That's through partnering with universities and actually doing that fundamental core low TRL work with universities and then pulling that through into industry. So I think it's vital. I think companies aren't always the best at it. I think companies have a lot to do. Big companies and small companies need to do better at forming those links with universities. And I think things like, setting summer projects and just very small things actually and helping them try and show the value of engineering and sell the engineering piece again to the students is really important. And it's something companies don't do very well. We didn't do very well. I think we're starting to do it better. But I think, there's still a journey to go on for industry to do that. And in terms of the funding side, I think for startups, talk to UK Space Agency. They've been fantastic for us. It's some work. It does take some work to get through the front door and actually have good, meaningful conversations. I think that that could be done better. Sometimes I think it's quite hard, I guess, for UK Space to deal with everyone, and how they channel that energy, across the society is quite difficult. But persevere, and I spent a lot of my time in the first 12 months, 18 months of my starting point at Filtronic, doing that, knocking on the door, talking to people, finding the right connections, and it does pay off in the end.
I would add a couple of comments. I mean, first of all, and this is a theme from successive presidents of the Royal Society, the early specialisation in the English education system is a really big problem. And we are expecting teenage girls, to take decisions about becoming a scientist or an engineer. And I've been to so many meetings over the years where they say, how do we persuade these 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds to go to science? The truth is, we shouldn't have a system which does require persuading 14-year-olds and 15-year-olds to take those kind of decisions. If you look at what happens in American universities, the biggest single group of applicants for any course at an American university are not yet decided. They turn up to university and they spend the first year trying out a range of different subjects, and then they focus on a major after that. And that also changes the culture of explanation. It means that the academics giving the lectures are pitching to making their subjects accessible so that students then decide they wish to study them properly. They are not committed as a result of some A-level decisions they took at the age of 16, plus incredibly restrictive university rules about moving from one subject to another. So the academics have to communicate completely differently. That's my first one. And my second observation, and we would like to do a bit more of this at the Space Agency if our budgets permit, but I do think that the fall in costs is an educational opportunity. CubeSats are now relatively low cost and accessible. Launch costs are falling. So there are ideas around for programs where universities can bid for a little CubeSat, and or even a sixth form college or an FE college could bid for a CubeSat or time using a CubeSat and have direct engagement in a way that would not have been possible a few years back. So there are more things we can do, but it's interesting it's come up as a theme. We'll now have the questions on that side of the room, and then I'll go to online. And I should have perhaps, if it's not too unfair, Carole, I'm going to ask you first from one online question, which kind of follows on from what we were just talking about. Has Katy Perry's mission to space helped or hindered the space sector? That's a very good one, but you give us your view on that.
I'll say both and move on. No, I mean, I think that it's been very controversial, but guess what? We're having a conversation. So there you go.
Very good. Very wise answer. Right, let's collect questions here. Yeah, starting there. You've got the microphone.
I'm not sure I can follow the Katy Perry question, but I'll try. Building on what you've been saying, Adam and Carole, you've both mentioned public awareness of NASA more than once this evening. How can we address the NASA T-shirt problem that you mentioned, Adam, and make ESA and the UK Space Agency in the UK the household names they should be?
We have a T-shirt already, Carolyn. I'll share it with you.
Right, we'll keep working. I'm going to collect several interventions on this side. Yep.
Hello, my name is Rafael Jordan. I'm the CEO and founder of Open Cosmos. We are very proud, actually, of being a prime delivering a scientific mission for ESA under the SCOUT program with 3 satellites to monitor the magnetic field of Earth. leading it from here, from the UK. And also we are delivering a very large Earth observation constellation, which will generate petabytes of data. So probably you see where my question is going to. You've shown in your presentations amazing science with amazing breakthrough developments in terms of technology. I think that Adam actually even mentioned, how do we transfer this knowledge to the private sector so we can implement it on data processing, data compression, payloads? I saw myriads of payloads in the presentation from Carole that I would love to learn more about and my engineers to learn more. And I feel that even if we are engaged in some of these programs, we struggle to have a full perspective of all of the knowledge, know-how being generated, who holds it. So my question is, how can we transfer that effectively to companies like ours so we can scale on the back of that know-how?
Very, very good, thank you. Now we're going to collect a couple more interventions. I think, yes, right at the back on this side, there's a couple more I see. The gentleman standing and then the gentleman sitting, yeah.
Joseph Meyer, Oxford University. So my role is in sustainability, and I'm really interested to understand how, discussions around space can also inform discussions here on Earth about how we use resources more sustainably, and what's the link between space, that sort of 100-mile up view, and what we can do down here on Earth.
Thank you very much. And then finally, the other, yep.
Been very interesting listening, because I think everyone agrees that our children are very enthusiastic in their primary education. Universities, obviously, although they're very good, I think the professors in that tend to specialize in their own activities, and very much the student at this stage may not actually get to know too much about engineering in its broadest sense. They become specialists in learn about certain activities. Surely the place we need to get is through secondary education, where we need to get a lot more engineering understanding into that age group, to show them what a broad subject and what a load of activities are available for their interest at that level.
Right.
I fear that at the moment we don't do that in secondary education.
Okay, another education question, and also Open Cosmos is a very significant high-growth new space company. It's great to have Open Cosmos represented here. Carole, why don't you start?
Sure. So we've got sustainability, knowledge transfer, and that education piece, which I'll touch briefly on because I think we've discussed it quite a lot. Let me start with knowledge transfer. I mean, you're absolutely right. There is such a wealth of that in all of these missions across all of our programs. And of course, we're always pushing for the future. We do have a dedicated knowledge transfer unit in ESA. And even within ESA, we find it hard. We're developing a new academy. We've got a new independent project management authority to make sure that we are sharing that knowledge across all of our engineers who are immensely busy delivering, to make sure that we can look sometimes for breakthrough niches, because something that's developed in one place might suddenly bring a breakthrough elsewhere. It's not always that in the science program we invent things from scratch, we can translate. I think I will take your question away and discuss it with my teams. I mean, what I found coming in as Director of Science is that even just with the science community, I needed to drive more transparency. So I've had open town halls where I've said, this is how the program works, this is where we're going, this is how things work, this is what you can do to engage, this is where we are. One of the things we do with companies, obviously, my team will work very much on those early technology stages, and because we have to deliver the return on investment to each and every one of the 23 countries, we're constantly looking for ambition, for new capabilities that companies or countries want to develop. We'll do it with their government departments. We'll also come and scout and horizon scan. And one of the things when we're putting out invitations to tender to the prime companies, we might do a restricted competition within some countries. We'll have a sense of what's there, but we don't always necessarily find all of the companies. So what we're increasingly doing is going out. We might be saying to the prime contractors, you need to go and seek, or we will reach out and say, a company like yours might say, well, we know that there's an ITT coming, but we haven't been contacted by the prime. So we can then direct the prime towards you. So there's a bit of matchmaking, but again, we can do more of that. I think on the sustainability issue, there's a number of ways to answer that. Obviously, we have a very strong Earth observation program. That's something that, again, is world-leading for Europe. The Copernicus satellites, you can see the quality of the engineering, the quality of the data, again, all freely available, and very much driving that downstream application economy across Europe. And again, I think that, an envy of the world. We are looking in this next ministerial across the agency to develop some new capabilities there that the European Commission are asking us to scope out. And of course, we're sitting in that resilience defense space as well as the world changes. But I think probably even more critically important is the sustainability of the space environment. So obviously, we have programs for the Sustainable Development Goals for the United Nations, but that sustainability of the Earth, the Earth space environment, where we need to use space in the future for sustainability on Earth, but that space is becoming crowded. Spectrum is contested, low Earth orbit is contested, and we also have a zero debris charter at ESA, which is voluntary. Companies and countries can sign up to it, but what we pledge with our ESA missions is that we do a full life cycle analysis of all of our missions to make sure that we store a little bit of extra propellant so we can safely retire our space assets and we don't leave them to become future space debris. But that's a value proposition. We're not policymakers, we're not governments or heads of state. We can't force other countries to behave that way, but we hope that by behaving in the right way, we will actually mobilize public support to make sure that everybody also behaves well in space.
Thank you, Carole. And actually, can I just come back to you on one of your points? This issue is about sort of access for business, because the most upvoted question on Slido is, when starting from scratch, what's the best route to get access for the ESA funding? It's a very complex system for starters. Is there anything more you can say on that?
I think make yourself known to your national space agency is the first step, because obviously when we engage with our member states, we're doing that. We have a number of different committees and we're doing that in all sorts of different ways. So I think get to know your space agency. UKSA used to be really quite small. It's growing, but again, the team work very hard. They cover a lot, all the way up to the United Nations, and we send them lots of paperwork from ESA to read, and they read every word. So I think first of all, make yourself known, but also decide what it is that you want to be good at. And I think the Filtronic story is a very good lesson to take, because there are two different types of companies. There are the ones that start up thinking we will come for public funding, that so-called institutional funding, and we'll grow from there. Then they have to engage with our commercialization programs, and we have to try to help them to become commercially viable and independent. Then there's the other companies that have developed their commercial side, who we then reach out to, or SpaceX reach out to and say, my God, you've got this absolutely nailed, and we need that efficiency and effectiveness in our public funded programs. So again, think what you want to do, how you want to do it, but also connect across industry. I know they might be your competitors, but they can also be your collaborators.
Very good. Now I'm going to ask Adam and Tudor if you've got any very brief comments, because I want to try then squeeze in some online questions. Anything you want to add on those?
Very quickly, I think last year on Netflix, I watched the David Attenborough show on our planet, and what he pointed to was a moment that brought everybody together to think about our planet in a sustainable way, was the first view from space. So I think it's already had a profound way of connecting us to the environment. On the T-shirts, look, I think it's going to sound flippant, but we know we'll have done a good job. I'll feel very happy if on a sunny day like this, at least 1 in 5 T-shirts is European. It can be ESA, it can be UXA, it can be CNES, it can be DLR, I don't mind. But I think, we need to do a better job with connecting with people, and if we find a way to get your merchandise out there, that'd be great. And Lord Willetts, I think you're completely right about we narrow people too much in our education system. And in fact, we really lock them in a way that's like super perverse, and maybe my academics colleagues won't like this, but the master's programs we link in this country, actually in Europe, to our undergraduate programs, whereas in the US, the master's programs are linked to your PhD or your onward specialization. And so the expectation that a 16 or 17-year-old will know what they want to do for 4 years is insane. Now, the idea that maybe you can do 3 and then transition, I think, is a lot more sensible.
By the way, on the NASA sort of challenge for the space agency here, or ESA, I would add there is another angle now, and one doesn't say this with any relish, but what the US administration is doing, including in space, we've just had in the last 48 hours an announcement of big cuts in all the NASA programs to do with climate science and climate monitoring. Those type of changes, those have big effects, and I think that will mean everything from US scientists thinking of whether there are places they can do their work in Europe, together with a shift in the perception of where the balance of this activity is. So in the worst possible circumstances, I think there is a rebalancing opportunity now underway. I don't know if anything you want to add, Julian?
Very little. I would echo the sentiment that you made on filtering up data and disseminate it if we can.
Yeah.
It's quite a hard job to do. I think there's a lot of data there so to filter that. But I think
I would just say what we do for companies who do bid. We now, from the science program, we've now rolled this across the agency. We do a supplier evaluation. So when you bid, even if you're not successful, you will always get very deep technical feedback back on your bid. So I think once you're engaged in the system, you're going to get huge learning opportunities. And I think it's back to the online question, how do you engage in the first place? And how can you grow that almost non-linear knowledge transfer? Because I know you're also competing with one another, but I think when you can share, I mean, you look at big companies like Rolls-Royce, they will keep their stuff very secret for a year, then they'll share it out. Yeah. So you can, I think you can grow that. And I think SpaceX also was similar. So a lot of the stuff that they were sharing, it's not worth the effort to keep it in because we're now doing other pioneering stuff, but you share it out, then you can vertically integrate.
And in the US, some of the data now needs to be protected and preserved. You can't even be.
Exactly.
Some of it is, I think, also now in jeopardy. For the online question, just briefly, because but they've one angle, which is a very good one, is looking across from space to links with other emerging technologies, quantum, photonics, advanced materials, where the UK has strength. To what extent can we link that to space with space science applications? And in fact, a separate question, what role do you think quantum computing will play in space science and innovation? So I think a good note on which to end is how this space science connects with so many other technologies. Adam, do you want to set the ball rolling on that?
Yeah, I think for quantum, the most immediate thing that I think we can see is the use of quantum sensors. That's fairly straightforward. We've been very good at adopting the newest, latest sensor technologies into science programs and using them to sense more deeply. So I think there's a relatively straightforward path for quantum sensing technology.
Yep.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would actually say, I don't mean to be boastful, but we've been doing quantum in space science for quite a long time. As Adam says, because of the sensitivities we need. I think the question on quantum computing, obviously we hear a lot around this, that, you know, there's much innovation in UK universities. I think there's also a lot of connection with classical computing. There's an awful lot around error analysis. So I think there's a lot of innovation still in the classical computing and then the interface with quantum. I mean, for me, I think there are two ways you can think about space. You can either develop that technology, which you then want to fly in space in order to do something fundamental. So, for example, advanced materials for the Envision mission, because we will do a thing called aerobraking in the oxygen-rich environment of Venus. And oxygen is a very corrosive element, and we need advanced materials there. The other thing you can do is you can use space to develop your materials. So, for example, the science that happens on the International Space Station, you use space as an environment in which you want to do some of your innovative technology development. So, for example, quantum key distribution and these types of things. So there are different ways to use it. You're either studying it or you're going there because it lets you do things you can't do from the ground, but you can also do your lab experiments up there as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Tudor, anything you want to add on that?
I think from our point of view, that cross-domain piece, you know, using space in technology and vice versa, is why we're in the space industry in the first place. You know, we didn't have space technology; we had ground-based technology that we leveraged into space, and vice versa. You know, so we'll take technology that we do in space now and leverage that in defence and in other verticals. You know, I think it's the same technology. The fundamental building blocks are the same. You know, particularly in the RF microsphere anyway, it's cross-dimensional, you know, and we try and learn from different domains and we apply that somewhere else. And that could be harsh environment, it could be something else, but we're continuing to learn and we apply that somewhere else. And that's how we grow the business. You know, we grow the business by actually being more diverse than just having one technology. Yeah.
I think there is a lot more to be done for just to make it clear how useful space is in so many different ways, and for me as a layperson, but what you can do now in microgravity, the shift of R&D, as you said, Carole, and even perhaps manufacturing up into low Earth orbit, where you can produce without the distorting effects of strong gravity and without some of the issues around sediment or whatever, growing your crystals, growing some of your cells in those circumstances, I think is going to be very exciting. Well, thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to our 3 panelists. Thank you for your questions, and to our online participants. I should also thank Filtronic, both not just for your bringing the voice of business and industry into our discussions, but also for sponsoring this, which we greatly appreciate. Our next event will be on decarbonising the built environment and delivering the Warm Homes Plan on the 21st. The homes are warming up quite well at the moment. That event is on the 21st of May. And then we will be up in Scotland at the University of Edinburgh on the 29th of May for an event on high-performance computing. Details of both events on our website. Thank you for joining us online. And for the people who've made the effort to be with us physically, you get a drink. And we'll now adjourn for a drink and then have dinner downstairs at 8 o'clock. Thank you to everyone.